Welcome to another episode of Off the Record with the Tacoma Ledger. We got another great one for you today, the best one that we've done. Take it away, Michaela.
Okay, so today we're going to be talking about at least for me, a very popular aspect of fandom culture, which is fanfiction. So, to start this off, I kind of want to get some initial thoughts. Do we think fanfiction is an art form? Is it a poor imitation of other people's work? Do we think it's, weirdly plagiarized? Ray, I'd like to get your take first.
Yeah, so, first of all, if anybody doesn't know what a fandom is, it's like the collective kind of pop culture-y name for a group of fans of a certain cultural aspect. So we talked last week about Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift's Swifties are her fandom, but other works of art or popular figures have fandoms. There's Harry Potter fandoms. There's other questionable fandoms. There's other good fandoms. There's Lord of the Rings fandoms.
Marvel Cinematic Universe
fandoms. Tons of different fandoms. As far as fan fiction goes, I think, there's so many complicated feelings about this. I do kind of feel like it's a little baby plagiarism, where if you're, and some of the writers are really good, where I'm if you're this good at writing, just write your own soul onto paper. But I also feel like if you are exploring your skills as a writer and you want something that has structure to play around with, where it's a little bit lower stakes, an online fan fiction base is not the worst thing that could happen.
Awesome. Eon, as someone who I know knows little to nothing about fan fiction, what are your initial takes just based off of what Ray has described?
Yeah, I think my initial takes would be, you asked kind of, would it be like an art form, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it is, and it's a way for people to kind of express themselves a little bit, right? And then kind of connecting to Ray when she said, it has kind of, some structure, people could use it, to develop their skills, right? And I'm not sure if that it's done in the industry, but people use that in their personal portfolios, right? It could be possible. So it's kind of my thoughts is to use as kind of expressive art, I feel like.
Mm-hmm. So for me, I think fan fiction is really interesting for a lot of reasons. Because, you're taking this source material, you're taking these characters that have, usually very identifiable traits, depending on, what fandom you're writing in. I'll use Marvel as an example. Let's say Steve Rogers, Bucky Barnes fanfic. You know who those two characters are. You know how they interact. But, you're taking this, and you're okay, but what if they interacted in this way instead? In a way, you're taking the source material and being well, what if it was completely different? And I really enjoy that because I have very specific characters that I really like. And I'm just well, this is just a great way for me to get more content of these characters. Especially in a way where I'm just well, I think this could work personally, but, I think the writers and producers of certain projects are cowards and won't do it. So this is a way for me to indulge myself and enjoy myself, while not having to consume any media by the people who won't actually produce it. For those who are largely unaware of fanfiction, there's I feel there's three main places to read it. There's AO3, there's Wattpad, there's fanfiction.net. Ray, what are your thoughts on each of those platforms?
Oh, the internet is such a lawless wasteland. My first thought that comes up when I hear any of those three platforms is the internet is forever, and what you put out there stays out there. So think about that before you hit publish. The second thing I would say about those platforms is expect to be shocked, and maybe not in a good way, all the time. As far as both people's writing and then sometimes the content of people's writings is dubious. And I think partially that's what it's for, but then at the same time, if you're an unassuming reader who wants to just read an alternative storyline or an alternative ending to something with your beloved childhood characters, or maybe your series was cut short or something, and so it lives on in fan fictions, sometimes it can be jarring to see what people's creative minds imagine for these characters. As far as platforms, I think I started when I was much younger reading, I started reading on fanfiction.net because it was accessible. It was what my friends were writing and reading on. And so we did a lot of that. It's also pretty easy to edit each other's stories that way. And then when I was a little bit older, I started reading a lot of Wattpad material because you can publish pretty much anything on Wattpad and nobody edits it or looks at it before you publish it. There's good and bad to that, but that's also, like, there's thousands and thousands of stories on Wattpad. And then AO3 I kind of have stayed away from because I don't know how many people these days are old enough to remember the Wild West that is 4chan, where it was like the precursor to Reddit where anything goes. I feel like AO3 is very similar to that, where anything can just be up there. Weird content, adult content, super boring content, anything is just there.
The one thing I will say about AO3 in particular, and honestly why I prefer it for reading fan fiction, is because you're able to filter it really well for what you want and what you don't want. Like, say you don't like crossovers in your fan fiction, you don't want fandoms to interact, you can exclude them, like, with one button.
I like that.
You can also filter by relationships you want to see, or if there's any, like, tags of things you really don't want to see, you can exclude those. So for me, it's super helpful in terms of, like, a filtering system. Wattpad, I feel like, does not have that.
No, that's what came to mind.
Filtering
Wattpad
system
does not have that filtering at all.
I was on Wattpad briefly in, like, middle school, and I was just like, God, this is some of the most, like, atrocious things I think I've ever put myself through. This is horrifying for so many reasons. And I feel like fanfiction.net is, like, everyone's kind of intro to fanfiction. Like, I feel that's where most people start, and then maybe if you continue, like, reading it, you eventually graduate to AO3.
Yes.
But I don't remember what the filtering is like on fanfiction.net. I know you could filter by relationship, and I know you could filter by rating, but I don't know how many other filtering things it had.
I think also that they're like user tags, so users can tag something and then submit that tag, and then it becomes something where you can filter by that tag. But if only one user has submitted that tag, then you're only going to get the one story, and then sometimes there's multiple tags that are the same thing that are like one letter different, or maybe the capitalization is different. So that's
Someone spelled it
a
differently.
really, that's just a really confusing aspect of the platform, is the like user submitted tags just with zero regulation. And then filtering by like the rating or like appropriateness rating for fan fiction is very interesting because the FCC is not controlling fan fiction, and so what
It's
do
up
those
to
ratings
author
even
discretion.
mean?
Yeah, it's fully up to author discretion, which is both good and bad, in my opinion.
Yeah, because something could be marked like at the most mature rating because someone is smoking a cigarette in one of the scenes, or it could be at the most mature rating for body things happening. Like, it just kind of could be anything.
I love the way you worded that. Eon, as someone who doesn't read fanfiction, if you were to pick a platform based off of our descriptions, what do you think you would pick?
So I've never used any of the three you mentioned, but I have used Reddit, you know. I think Reddit's pretty cool just for, like, conversation, seeing threads, and, like, you know, you can go back, you know, they always say, right, if you have a problem someone else, like, has had it already and it's on Reddit, so, like, when I'm working on my car or something, or a boat, or really anything, matter of fact, you know, going on Reddit's a good source to find. And I think, I guess, like, a little, I guess, connection to fan like, fiction is, like, a lot of it is, you know, free, right? I think it's pretty, like, you know, not costly at all. And so, like, to get the information or to get entertainment that way, or reading, I think it's really good. So, yeah, I've used Reddit.
Yeah, I guess the other thing to note, kind of along those lines, is that Wattpad also has ads, like, in between chapters. I distinctly remember that, and it's really irritating. It's, out of those three, it's the only one that has ads, and you can pay for a premium version where you don't get ads, which I think is really silly for fan fiction, personally.
The writing is not better in the premium version.
No.
It just doesn't have ads.
I can't imagine it would be. Well, on that note, I was going to talk about the differences between writing and reading fanfiction, because I'm more of a consumer of fanfiction myself, but from what you've told me, it sounds like you do some writing of it.
I do. Do you want to talk about reading first or writing first?
I want you to tell me about your writing.
Okay.
I also want you to tell me, like, what is, like, the process behind it? Like, how do you come up with scenarios that you want to imagine particular characters in?
So I will say it's interesting that we bring up Reddit, because I've gone to Reddit for prompts for fan fictions before, where I'm like, let's look at, like, how other people are dealing with this and imagine a scenario where I dealt with it that way, or where XYZ people dealt with it that way. As you were talking about, like, car stuff on Reddit, I was like, I wonder if there's car service fan fiction where you go to the car service and you get, like, exactly what you need done and not 10 other things, or some sort of ideal car service fan fiction scenario. But in answer to your question, Michaela, most of my fan fiction is, like, real world scenarios happening in the ideal way, and I write, like, as a catharsis of, like, here's how it would have happened if everybody was nice to each other, or if everybody was good at their jobs, or, like, if everybody, I don't know, in this paint and sip night had to use blue paint and no other colors. Like, it's just a random, like, idea detox where after a stressful day, I come home and I write about the day in a way that never would have happened that way. But I can just, like, put those ideas and those feelings kind of to rest.
I read a lot of books, obviously, on top of reading fan fiction. So for me, like, reading fan fiction is just another, like, I use books as a form of escapism. I'm just like, the world kind of sucks. Let me go escape into this made-up world with these made-up characters and, like, kind of live vicariously through them for a little bit. And for me, fan fiction is very similar. It's just like, okay, I already know I like these characters. I want to read about them in a different context and continue to live vicariously through them. For me, I also enjoy reading it because, for me, it's like, oh wow, here's this, like, great scenario that I personally would never put myself through, but it's fun to read about. Like, romantic relationships, I'm just like, that's not something I'm personally into all the time, but I like reading about it, and I like reading about my favorite characters having actual healthy romantic relationships. Eon, would you rather write or read fan fiction?
You know, normally I'm not really a reader.
Mm-hmm.
Not really a writer either, necessarily, too, but I'd say I prefer to write. So I do kind of a lot of offshore fishing in the summer and whatnot, kind of a hobby of mine, and there's a community around that, right? Kind of like there's a community around everything or anything, and so you could imagine, right? Like when someone's passionate about talking or writing, you can make it happen, right? And so, like, I find myself a lot of times, I like in Nia Bay in Washington, there's, like, I'd say the main ports in Washington is, like, Nia Bay and Westport. And so, like, they have fishing articles, and I write a bit, like, about with those articles as well. And so I'd say writing is what I do. Fan fiction wise, I could imagine myself catching a really large fish and writing about that. So
Love it.
I mean, how often do fishermen write fan fiction when they're like, it was this big, and it seems to get bigger every single time?
I'm excited for the offshore fishing fan fiction.
Yes, I would read that. I want to address a point that our producer Justin made in a previous podcast episode regarding Lord of the Rings being Bible fan fiction. Now, I feel like I briefly addressed this in the podcast, but I want to go a little bit more into depth as to what would count as, like, religious fan fiction versus, like, being more inspired by the idea of, like, a creation myth. To me, Lord of the Rings, with the way that, like, the lore is structured and the world building is structured, yeah, the creation myth can look kind of similar to what maybe someone has read in the Bible. You're like, oh, well, that kind of looks the same, and that looks the same. But I don't think that Lord of the Rings delves into the actual stories that are in the Bible. So I don't think objectively it would count as Bible fan fiction. Now, C.S. Lewis, on the other hand, Chronicles of Narnia, that to me, a lot of it is, like, there's a lot of religious symbolism there. Ray, you brought up a really interesting point about, like, is it religious fan fiction or is it just, like, taking this aspect of religion and, like, just building a story off of it. Would you like to expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. As a writer and reader of fantasy world-building works, I think one of the most important things that you have to consider when making cultures and peoples believable is that all people have something they believe in, whether they identify it as a religion or whether it's just a daily practice like brushing your teeth. And so when you're thinking about fantasy world-building, developing that sense of religion and sense of belief in your characters really centers them in the human psyche as relatable. In a story where the world building is as vast as that for Chronicles of Narnia or for Lord of the Rings, it's almost an essential aspect of the character development themselves that they have this belief system that guides what they do. And for, like, Chronicles of Narnia, there's this belief in the spirit of Aslan and in the creation, the singing of the world into being. And the Lord of the Rings is very similar, where the world came into being through song, and it's the song of these this elder council that creates existence as we know it. But I don't necessarily think that there is tons of overlap with biblical narratives there, other than just to say, here is this core belief of how the world came into being that all, I think, good world building has.
One thing I will say is Bible fan fiction is the Book of Mormon. That objectively is Bible fan fiction.
I would also say the C.S. Lewis point, it's that description is more apt for C.S. Lewis because the Screw Tape Letters is literally just about, like, devils, like the devils, not any kind of other devils. It's a satire about that. And then you have
the Cosmic Trilogy.
I'm going to dub over this part as if I remembered the name of the series, which essentially is just like Earth fan fiction. Because it talks about Earth. Yeah, it talks about Earth as if it's like this otherworldly alien place, and then, you know, spoilers, he's talking about Earth. It's just, it's like, if an alien crash landed on Earth, what would it look like to them? So C.S. Lewis is pretty much made his entire career writing fan fiction, when you really think about it.
Sure. We can say that. He's dead. He can't sue us.
He can't sue us. The Lord of the Rings relationship there is interesting because it almost does read as though J.R.R. Tolkien is writing fan fiction of his own works, because the way that he treats the world and the information of Middle-earth is as though that these are works or testimonies written down by those characters, that he has come into possession of this library of information and he is now the caretaker. And so in some ways, that framework of, like, I'm going to write this story about all of these other stories that I have and put it all together is kind of fan fiction-y, but it's almost more of, like, that curator role than I think C.S. Lewis encompasses, where C.S. Lewis is very allegorical, and that is much more of his point.
Yeah, Tolkien hated allegories, but, you know, there, like, are some maybe mild ones present, I would say. I actually pulled up my AO3 because I wanted to look at my bookmarks and actually see the, like, top fandoms I have bookmarked. The first one, weirdly enough, because I did not watch the first 2 seasons of this show, Stranger Things. I got really into Steve and Eddie fanfiction back in, I guess, 2022 is when season 4 came out, and apparently I have 41 fanfictions bookmarked about that specifically. The next one is Top Gun fanfiction, which is really hilarious to think about.
That's niche.
It is, but it isn't. There's a lot of content out there. There's more than you'd expect. Or maybe not, because, I mean, the first movie objectively has a lot of homoerotic tension, and the second one is just as bad. I mean, Hangman and Rooster, like, you watch them on screen and you're like, yeah, they're exes. The way they interact, you're just like, oh, yeah. And then the next one is the MCU, of course. I feel like that's just a very popular fandom in general. And then after that, it's Lord of the Rings. I got really into Lord of the Rings fanfiction, like, this year. I read a very good one that's, like, I want to say it's longer than War and Peace in terms of word count. It was really in-depth. It explored a lot of the like lore of Lord of the Rings. Like I feel like I learned more from that than reading the actual books because it was so much more digestible. But it was genuinely entertaining. But yeah, in terms of ships, I mean, it varies. I mean, if we're talking about Top Gun, I mean, Maverick and Iceman, and also Hangman and Rooster. I mean, objectively, just kind of, yeah, it makes sense. On that note, if you were reading fanfiction, what would you say your top fandoms or ships are? Because I know you've read it.
There's two parts there. Lord of the Rings will always be like one of my favorite fandoms. I know a lot about it. I know a lot about the characters. I try not to get too lost in the sauce of this is what happened on this page of this obscure Tolkien book. And just go with the flow of like the characters because it's fun, it's relaxing. Oftentimes it's much less intensive reading than the original language. So it's kind of like Lord of the Rings vacation time with Lord of the Rings. So that is fun. But I think I grew up reading all sorts. I grew up reading like Artemis Fowl fanfictions, and I grew up reading like mystery series fanfictions, and I was in maybe 6th grade when Warriors started to become huge, and like everyone was starting to figure out what Warriors was, and now it's like this whole big cult thing of wildly successful fan fiction artists and fan fiction writers, and it's just like become
That's full-on flashback to my childhood.
Yeah.
And kind of a traumatizing one.
But I was like, I think there were only 6 books out, the original 6 books, when I started reading Warriors fan fiction.
And speaking of Warriors, the Golden State Warriors, I mean, we can't, you know, people who write about actual people and ship actual people with each other, such as, you know, the famously acclaimed LeBron and Steph Curry, that many talk about all the time.
Many, you say?
There should be a picture
Many.
that flashes up when you say that in the podcast.
I don't know if I can put that on there. I'll just flash it for like a single frame so nobody will know.
Yeah, so shipping in fanfiction is where you imagine a relationship between two of the characters that may, but often do not, have an established relationship in the canonical storyline. Canonical just means what the author or creator has approved. So as far as shipping, for me, I find if you're shipping make-believe characters, that is one thing, and that is certainly a thing. If you're shipping real people and then you have like emotional investment in this imaginary ship, which we see a lot of people doing and feeling, this can be extremely problematic because especially for people in the public eye, that sort of pressure that is reliant on an imagined relationship that never happened is just, I don't know, we live in an age where if you don't do what the public wants, you get canceled. So if the public wants you to have some sort of imagined relationship with some sort of other character and enough of your fan base is invested in that relationship, then things start to fall apart. And we've seen that a lot in like the Twilight fandom, where there's entire rifts in the fandom and that characters and the artists and the creators have been attacked because these make-believe characters didn't date someone or another. And then we see that bleeding over into the fandoms of the real actors and actresses, where because they didn't maintain a relationship with XYZ person, they lost following or they lost credibility or something. And I just think that takes it maybe too far to where, like, if in your head, non-problematically, you're shipping two characters that never existed, whose consent to that ship is relative to the fact that they don't exist in the real world, that is one thing. But if you're shipping two people that do, or two or more people that do exist in the real world, and that just opens a big can of worms about like public consent and parasocial relationships that we kind of have touched on here before, and other just really nitty-gritty gross possibilities.
Two key examples that come to mind when I think of like shipping real people. One, this takes me back to like my preteens, was Louis Tomlinson and Harry Styles. So I don't know when it started specifically. But when Louis Tomlinson and Harry Styles were members of One Direction, many fans theorized that they were in a romantic relationship. They used like songs as evidence. There was this idea that they had all of these matching or like corresponding tattoos. It was this whole big, I'm going to use a word that Louis Tomlinson has used, conspiracy, because it's just like, there's no actual proof that this ever happened. And people were just downright weird about it on the internet. Like, they would get harassed, whoever their romantic partners at the time would get harassed by these fans, being like, no, you're actually in love with your bandmate, just come out already. And first of all, being queer in general, it's like that is something where you process that and you come out on your own terms. No one can force you to do that. No one should force you to do that. If you force people to do that, you suck as a human being. Yes. So I think that is a really big issue with shipping real people, is when you start being like projecting this onto those people and really just making it their problem. That was such a like big thing in like that fandom space for such a long time. And it drove them apart in terms of their friendship. The other key example that comes to mind is Dan and Phil. Now, they did actually confirm, after 16 years, that they were in fact in a relationship. However, they were still subjected to harassment throughout their careers that probably had a lot of impacts on their relationship. And from everything they've said, it was incredibly traumatizing for them. So, my general feeling about shipping real people is do it in your head. Do not harass real people about it. It sucks. It's kind of an evil thing to do. Eon, based off of everything we've said, what's your take?
Like on shipping?
On shipping real people, specifically.
Yeah. I feel like definitely, like you mentioned, it being pulled into real life, right? Because when things are kind of online, it could be like exaggerated pretty far. Mm-hmm. And when that translates into real life effects, I mean, you know, it's also exaggerated, right? And so like oftentimes like kind of the harassment is just multiplied. And like compared to, I guess if it wasn't as publicized, let's say like it's a smaller group, right? And they kind of, you know, maybe making fun of each other about it or whatnot, but when it's like kind of multiplied across media and everything, you know, that stuff leads to, you know, mental health issues, right? Mm-hmm. It leads to, you know, suicide. So I feel like, you know, it's very important to highlight like how media has to play with like shipping and the effects, mm-hmm. and it being magnified through that. So
this is actually something that has been sort of happening with a very popular current TV show on HBO Max, Heated Rivalry. It's less extreme than I feel like Dan and Phil and Louis Tomlinson and Harry Styles, but like people were like doing the same kind of harassment to the actor who plays Shane Hollander, Hudson Williams. I believe he has a girlfriend. People started like harassing her. But people are like not necessarily pretending they're in a relationship, like him and his co-star. But they are just like, oh, wouldn't it be cute if? And I'm like, there's a very like slippery slope here, where it's just like, sure, would it be fun? I guess, but these are real people. You can't manipulate their lives. Also along the lines of Heated Rivalry, there was a rumor originally that the first book in the series, which is called Game Changers, which follows two different characters that appear in Heated Rivalry but aren't the main characters, it was originally a Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes fanfic. So, the author did come out and address these claims, and basically she said she was unaware that you could actually post original work on AO3, which I guess also if you're unaware, you can in fact post original work on AO3. You just have to tag it as such. So she was plotting out this story called Game Changers, but she adapted it because she wasn't aware of the AO3 rules, and it was a Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes fanfiction. which I just think is really funny, because the way the actors are cast in the episode, you're kind of just like, yeah, I can see that. But it's really interesting, like, taking fan fiction and being like, okay, could this actually be, like, adaptable into an actual book? And I feel like the answer sometimes is yes, as long as your characters don't necessarily have super identifiable traits as other characters. I personally feel like fan fiction can be adapted into original works. What is your thought on that?
Well, I think MCU is interesting because comic book worlds, when you think about fan fiction as like the recreation of a storyline with known characters, that's how comic books work, is that different artists build onto this story and it becomes this like multi-generational legacy of lore surrounding these characters, but it's all from different iterations and different versions and different knowings of the story and of those characters. And I think that's one of the most beautiful parts of it. That's what allows MCU to investigate that sort of what if series and concept. And like, especially when you bring in like multi-dimensional realities and like split realities and alternative timelines, I think that allows you to really blast that door open of like every fan fiction is now an alternate reality that we can explore under the guise of this is Marvel's What If. So I think like MCU fan fiction to me, or even like comic book in general fan fiction to me, is like almost the highest form where this is just part of the lore. This is part of the tradition of building that lore. In the 2010s, there was a series that came out, very, very big series, but it was Twilight fanfiction, and it entered the noosphere of written work, and then blew up. And this series has had movies, this series has had book tours, all these actors in this film series have gone on to take much more meaningful roles. So I think that shows that fan fiction can very much become a cultural statement on its own. I would just say, like, part of what you were talking about with the heated rivalry thing is that when there's tension, a lot of times people jump to, oh, it's sexual tension. Because as a culture, I think that is the only tension that we are consistently reminded how to resolve. Where, like, if there's sexual, it must be sexual tension because then there's a clear resolution to this sexual tension. They just have sex and then it's over. But if it's emotional tension, if it's family tension, maybe it's paternal tension, maybe it's like ambition is getting, those are much heavier to unpack. So it's kind of harder as like collectives to say, oh, maybe these two characters are dealing with more intricate things than just lusting after each other. So I think that is huge in where that shipping issue comes from, is it's the most easily seeable and resolvable tension.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of fan fiction that is eventually adapted into books, usually are like romance novels, essentially. Two come to mind. One is the After trilogy, which I haven't ever read, but I know it was adapted from a Wattpad series, and then it was turned into really terrible movies, from what I've heard. The other one that comes to mind off the top of my head is Ali Hazelwood's books, specifically like The Love Hypothesis, which I know for a fact originated as Rey and Kylo Ren's Star Wars fan fiction. And I think it's really interesting to think about in terms of like, okay, we have these really well-written fan fictions, but why are only the romance ones getting adapted? I feel like there's some sort of weird line there on what publishers are willing to adapt and what they're not. And I think it does like break down into the idea of identifiable characteristics of these characters, because I feel like when you're writing fan fiction and it doesn't deal with romantic or sexual tension, like, you're just talking about other things those characters might deal with, and those are very identifiable. Like, there's no simple way to completely, like, you'd have to completely rewrite it with different characters, different character traits, probably, and you'd probably have to change the entire situation. But I feel like it's a good, maybe, framework to build off of if you're building your skills as a writer.
I would say it could be that, from what Ray was saying earlier, is sexual tension tends to be the easiest thing to resolve and process and all of that. So if you're making a whole production out of it, that is kind of like, well, do we take this really difficult to adapt concept and, to resolve concept, or do we... but I think in the same way is that because it's the easiest or the most simplistic to resolve, it could very much be in sort of like what Ray was saying earlier.
Yeah, and I think it's just probably overall more digestible. I mean, people will hate on romance novels for being like fluff, basically. Being like, oh, anyone can read a romance novel. And it's like, yeah, sure, but it's like, let's not necessarily discredit all of them. Like, some are like, have really interesting like character struggles. None are specifically coming to mind right now. But I mean, there's nothing wrong with just enjoying a book. It doesn't have to teach you anything necessarily. I read a lot of very dense, I feel like very hard to read books sometimes, and sometimes I just need a break. And for me, like, I'll pick up a romance book, or I'll read a fan fiction, and it'll just kind of break me out of whatever reading funk I'm in.
Good reset.
Mm-hmm.
Do any of you have any experience interacting with Dungeons and Dragons?
Yes.
Okay. With Dungeons and Dragons, it's very common that all of a sudden everybody's bisexual and dating each other, and it becomes a soap opera, and that is an extremely common thing, which also when you're talking about, nerd culture or LGBTQ, all of that, there's a lot of people that it intersects with. And so, yeah, Dungeons and Dragons is very much, I mean, it's fan fiction, of a lot of different things.
Yeah. I'll add, if I may, just for a moment, when we talk about like the place of fan fiction for LGBTQ plus communities, it is really, really important to have that space because it's a space to write queer and trans and alternative representations that don't ever get published. The publishers don't want to put out there, or they don't want like kids to see, or whatever stupid reasons. It's a space for people who don't see themselves in media to take those stories and create spaces for themselves there. And I will stand that until the day I die. But at the same time, we all have to be respectful of the stories that we're adding to and the people that are impacted and being portrayed in those stories.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think, like, obviously there's been improvements over the years in terms of, like, what gets published and what doesn't, but there still isn't enough queer representation in books. I don't think we're ever, like, at least at the rate we're going to get the right amount of representation, or, like, especially for, like, queer women. You do not see a lot of queer women in media. It's very rare to see, and, I mean, let's take pretty much any film about relationships with queer women. How many of them just end really, like, in a really upsetting and depressing way, or in death?
Yeah, queer women is a tough one because I think that, like, people don't know how to tell that story without, A, undermining it, or B, fetishizing it. Like, those are the two routes of queer women, like, storylines in the modern mythology. Either it's being sold to people fetishizing the queer woman's relationship, or it's misconstruing what that relationship is, or that dynamic, or that story, or those wants and needs of those people through the eyes of often people who cannot tell that story accurately.
Mm-hmm. I would 100% agree. On that note, I would like to wrap up, first of all, by getting your kind of takeaways from this whole conversation, because once again, you're kind of an outsider here. You did not know what fanfiction was, really, when we started. What are your thoughts now?
I think overall hearing kind of like different sides and like I guess people expressing themselves through that and like shipping and those kind of things. I mean it's eye opening to learn, I guess, new stuff. But I did have a question. So you said adaptations. Is that when the creator actually takes that and puts it into the story, like real stuff?
So I'll use Ali Hazelwood's books once again as an example. Her book, The Love Hypothesis, originated as a fan fiction. When she submitted it to her publisher, she changed the names of the characters. They still had, like, physical characteristics that were very identifiable, but, and some personality characteristics that were identifiable, but nothing that could be tied back to, like, the actual source material. So, like, it's kind of like, if you know, you know, kind of thing. But yeah, you can technically adapt fanfiction as long as there's no copyright issues.
Okay, I see. And, like, for me, like, kind of hearing you guys, I definitely see the appeal of, like, fan fiction for people to, like, hear a continuation of the story, right? Mm-hmm. But, like, for me as a person, like, I've always been, like, you know, once the movie ends in the theater, I walk out, right? And I like knowing that there's, like, one ending. Mm-hmm. Like, no matter if I really agree with the ending or whatnot, I like knowing one ending, and I don't like that being clouded by, you know, personally, I don't like it being clouded if I read a bunch of different endings. I'm like, you know. So I usually, you know, once the movie ends, I just leave, and that's kind of the ending for me. But I do see the appeal of people, like, seeing kind of the different endings. But I wanted to ask you, like, do you read, like, multiple endings to, like, one kind of story, like, or?
I don't actually, like, most of the fan fiction I read aren't, like, necessarily different endings to stories. A lot of them are, like, continuations or alternate universe kind of things. For example, like, the Lord of the Rings fan fiction that I read is usually, like, a continuation. Sometimes there's these things, it's called a fix-it fic. Those are the ones where they change the ending if you were, like, really upset by it. Like, for example, The Hobbit. Everyone you love in that movie basically dies. So sometimes it can be really helpful and less depressing if you go and read a fan fiction that fixes all of that, and the people don't die, and it's significantly less upsetting.
I'd say also there's series like one of the big fandoms is the Firefly fandom, where they got 14 episodes of an absolute masterpiece, and then it was discontinued. Mm-hmm. So we never got an ending. We never got any sort of conclusion for those characters. We got one full-length movie a couple of years later that was also incredible, and then they just never touched it again. So there's a lot of unclosed doors for those fans where they're like, we want more from these characters. We want to learn more. And with that,
goodbye.